The language planning strategy is based on a common grammatical framework and basic lexicon. The aim has been to proceed gradually, flexibly, and progressively towards standardizing that starts from regional realities without forgetting the reality of the local states. Homogenization through convergence and international benchmarking is the credo adopted by the IRCAM. And the IRCAM researchers who come from different regions of the country, have multidisciplinary backgrounds, and are trained to the highest academic standards. Transcription in Tifinagh are thriving in public spaces now. You have seen it. When you come to Morocco, you have seen it. In public spaces. In May 2023, the Ministry of Education decided to introduce the teaching of the Amazigh language in all primary schools by 2030, with a target of 50% by 2026. Members of Parliament ask questions in Amazigh now, and debates in plenary sessions have been translated into Amazigh since 2022. Training institutions for senior government officials are introducing Amazigh language teaching into their curricula now in Morocco. Bachelor's, master's, and doctorate degrees as awarded by universities that have been developing specialized courses for 2 decades. Research units and study centers have been set up in Amazigh and in Tifinagh, and not just in Arabic, French, English, or Spanish, or Chinese, like it was the case several years before, as was the case 30 years ago. Courses are taught in Amazigh are not just about Amazigh. They are taught in Amazigh, not only about Amazigh. Of course, all this work, supported by the institutional and political arsenal gradually put in place since 2001, it's confronted with the challenge of the socio-economic language market, where competition is relentless. This renaissance and development of the Amazigh language has created in Morocco an environment and a context in which all Moroccans, Arabic speaking or Amazigh speaking, are reappropriate their culture in all its variants and its heritage, linguistic, artistic, social, and political dimensions. All these above institutional and political achievements are certainly important, but they can't remedy the damage caused by the marginalization of the language and culture in all its diversity, in its many dense, multifaceted ramification, nor the damage done into intangible social and local dimensions, whole swathes of the language and cultural diversity of each region, each family, each village, and each traditional community have been lost or destroyed forever as you told. In conclusion, despite all these achievements, the 2 official languages are totally dependent on the language markets and the players in the globalization process, which is dominated by the languages of scientific, technological, and digital globalization. The endangered languages spoken by indigenous community are carriers of traditional ecological knowledge, medicinal practices, and social practices, and substantial ways of living. When a language vanishes, part of human culture and heritage disappears with it. Endangered languages represent a unique part of the world cultural heritage. Their protection is not only a matter of linguistic diversity, but it is, first, cultural diversity as well. It is also vital to ensuring that future generations can benefit from the wealth of knowledge, traditions, and perspectives they offer. Nowadays, endangered languages are facing various threats, including cultural assimilation, economic pressures, and the domination of more widely spread languages. The protection and revitalization of these languages are essential for the protection of not only linguistic diversity, but also the cultural heritage of embodied. With the spread of digital technology and artificial intelligence, one way wonder about how many of these endangered languages will manage to resist and survive. Indeed, after 2 decades of the establishment of ILCAM, the introduction of Amazigh at school, after more than a decade of its introduction in the media and its officialization in the Constitution, the Amazigh community's attitude haven't changed much. That's the big problem. Under the impact of globalization, social media, and the spread of new technologies, Amazigh young generations still view Amazigh as useless and non-value and prefer to learn foreign languages, especially English, because of the education and professional opportunities the languages offers. Like the China with my friend and my colleague Karima, I would like to thank her for being here with us. When languages become the playthings of minority communities at the margin of productive and arrogant technology, that is the big question for me. Because in Morocco now we have not the problem of law with Amazigh, with the problem of practices in communities, families, and the daily life in societies. I thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Cruz, for your talk, really, where you try to actually go over the evolution of the status of Amazigh in Morocco, and telling people who are not aware. I think that's a very interesting talk, because people who are not familiar with the Amazigh case really got a clear idea about its evolution and how things are now, at what level they are now. Of course, as you may have noticed, I thank him very much for the effort he has made to speak in English. Actually, his working language, he would have been, I'm sure, more at ease in French or in Arabic, but I imposed on him to speak in English so as to really, and it was clear, very straightforward, and I hope that you have all enjoyed listening to him. So as he concluded, I really captured one of the things he said, and because I myself have been working on the Amazigh language since the 80s, so it's 50 years actually. I'm still young, huh? Yeah. I started very early, yeah. So for 50 years I've been working on Amazigh language, starting from my MA at the university, and I can tell you that I haven't noticed much change in the attitudes of communities. On the opposite, some of the communities that were more protective of the Amazigh language, and I would like to refer to the south of Morocco, especially in the case here with me that we are exploring with a former doctoral student of mine who is now a university professor. Even the areas that were protective of the Amazigh language are now giving up the Amazigh language, and you have the parents are no longer transmitting the language to their children. And this is actually, according to the experts, this is the main symptom of Amazigh language endangerment. When language transmission stops, natural language transmissions from one generation to the other stops. This is the evidence, the concrete evidence that the language is on its way to being lost. Of course, there are already Amazigh communities that have lost their language, but of course, despite the achievements achieved or the changes in the attitudes, the official attitudes, the introduction at school, but we can say what introduction. Even when we take initiatives, we should also evaluate how efficient these initiatives are. For instance, the teaching, we have had an evaluation of the teaching of Amazigh, and the IRCAM itself has declared that the teaching of Amazigh was a failure. It didn't succeed to achieve its goals. And of course, as we see, the officialization of Amazigh itself was established in 2011, and until now, not much has been done to implement it side by side with the modern standard Arabic. So, as Professor Cruz mentioned, the change in the attitudes or the authorities' attitudes does not lead to a change in the community's attitudes. And again, one important thing is that when a community is not interested in maintaining or revitalizing its community language, nobody can impose it on it. No matter what the IRCAM is doing, the school is doing, if the Amazigh communities parents do not take the initiative to transmit the language naturally from one generation to the other, we will reach a situation where we will have again a diagnostic situation between community language, everyday Amazigh language, and the standard form of the language, which actually, where we have actually listened to kids saying, this is what I say in my language, but this is what they say about speaking about the standard form of the language. So you see, this is exactly what is happening, and I think that Amazigh community should really react, and if anything should be done, it's via the communities that speak the language. So I would like to we would like to excuse ourselves for our colleagues following us on Zoom. We have, and audience as well, of course, but they are here with us. They have seen everything. The people on the other side of the virtual world don't see all what is happening. So we started a bit late, and of course, this is the first keynote speaker, and we will maybe open the floor for...
Can I say a couple of
Yeah,
things?
sure.
Yeah. Thank you. It's been fantastic week because you covered, just by taking one case, which is the case of Amazigh, you have covered a wide range of the topics which are actually in the theme of the conference. And you can say this is a very good example in which actually we're talking about different themes, but they all link up, and in this case they all link up in one specific language. I have to say that the case that he's described, which is the Moroccan case, is actually practically the same, or at least very similar everywhere in North Africa. And whatever happened in Morocco had happened in Algeria before, or after, or whatever, and Tunisia and Libya. Speaking of Libya, when he said that Tifina was invented in Libya, of course, Libya was the word for North Africa by the Greeks, so it's a Libyan or Libyc as they call it. So it's not the Libya of today. It was created in Libya, meaning it created North Africa a long time ago. This is just little things. And then, when talking about Tifina, it reminded me also something else, which is it was adopted in 2003. Our conference in Morocco, in Agadir, was in 2001. And in the middle of the conference, a group of our Moroccan colleagues left Agadir to come to Rabat because they had a meeting with all the government officials and the institutions in order to discuss the status of basically the script to be adopted by Berber. And this is the time when they realized that actually a lot of people, some of the Arabists didn't like the French, the Latin script. The Berbers wanted the Tifina. And then finally, they said, well, instead of the Latin or Arab, or rather, they didn't want or the Arabic script, let's take Tifina. In Algeria, it's exactly the opposite. They don't want Tifina. They're allergic to Tifina. Sorry?
It's a royal king.
It's a royal decision in Morocco, exactly. Whereas in Algeria, it's anathema. If you say Tifina, they all run away or they're captain, etc. Just to say, because you mentioned something about there is one side there is politics and the other there is the communities, the linguistic communities. Each one is capable of positive acts and negative acts. The communities, as he just said, abandon their own languages sometimes. They do more harm to their own languages than other outside communities. And you mentioned because they choose what is traditionally called in this area la lingua del pane, the language of bread. They follow the language which will allow them to survive. I don't call it live, but that's the thing. That's true. They follow that. But the politics can be negative or positive, and the community can be negative or positive, and then they're poor. However, rebirth and revitalization is the act of the community, but then with support from the political institution or whatever. So the politics, you don't have to go back to Machiavelli, but you mentioned one thing which to me was quite new, and I really liked it. You said languages and civilizations die from purity. I'm sure when you spoke, we can hear the quotation marks, purity, because a lot of people would interpret as the exact opposite, impurity. Purity meaning, the old adage, one state, one religion, one language. We know which government, that's precisely the most dictatorial or the most authoritarian governments which have adopted that. This is recent. And, however, perhaps in the 16th, 17th century, it was a positive act too, because a lot of kingdoms were all spread, there was no communication, and we were talking about uniting the kingdom, for instance. Recently, President Macron in France has opened a new institute of French, the French language. At Villers-Cotterêts. Well, it spreads to francophonie. It's the French of anyway. But the reason for that is that Villers-Cotterêts was the place where King François Ier in the 15th and 16th century decreed that the language of French, of the Loire Valley, basically the Far-East, would be the national language of the kingdom. So it's probably one of the first official acts of creating a national language. It's great because as far as he's concerned, it united all his subjects. However, it killed Occitan, it killed Breton, it killed all the other languages. So when we say purity, what it means is that one state it separates oneness. The language is pure, it doesn't have anything. So you remember Hitler used to do that, the Nazis used to do that to German. Clean up the language, have purity, get rid of all the interferences from others. But, so we talk about one, unite the kingdom, but then it happens that it does exactly the same. Because united, that means you clean it up, and in some cases we talk about ethnic cleansing. It's the same thing in linguistic cleansing in many ways. It's the oneness. In Algeria, they used to call it unicity, and that's the thing. Because you mentioned in North Africa, when we're talking about the rebirth, I have to remind people that the first spring that took place was actually the Berber Spring in 1980, which started in Kabylia, but has become a pan-North African things now. Now, of course, we have to invent all sorts of other springs in order to set the balance. But so I think you put your finger on it, but you put probably 10 fingers on these issues, and so we have to remember that all these things go back to what the communities have to take charge of their languages, but then the political will has to follow from them first, and then from the institutions. Thank you. Perhaps we were very late, but I'm sure a lot of people would probably want one or two questions. I don't know. So.
Yeah, maybe.
Can you take one or two questions?
One, two questions. More?
Unless.
Yeah, Esther.
Balade.
Thank you, Professor, for your rich presentation.
I would like to mention the difference between written and oral languages. The fact that the language is written is a privilege because we have lexicon, we have grammar, we can teach it, etc. But we have some languages that doesn't have this privilege. And we have also, in this case, the burden of learning or relearning, in the case of Berber, for example. So, how is the situation for Morocco?
The situation is a complex one, and because the problem is too big. I was in the board of ILCAM when this question had been discussed. I was in the Ministry of Education, and after I was in the Commission for the National Council. We have discussed about all these issues. The problem in Morocco is first, we have political problems, our problems as Moroccans with languages, because it's the same case in Algeria, for instance, because here we have no problem between Arabs and Amazirs. All Moroccans are so
just Moroccans.
they are Moroccans. I am Moroccans. I am a Moroccan. I am Arab. I am Berber. It's true. It's true. So when I speak or I try to defend Amazigh language, I try to do it not because I am Amazigh, because I am a Moroccan people. And in Morocco, we have not this problem. We have not this problem. It is important for us. Second one, because we have Darija. For me, it is a language. But we have also a political problem with Arab Classic. With us, our problem with Arab, it's not a problem of Arab Classic. It's a problem of Morocco in the area of Arab in the world. Because we have a history. I am talking about the Ummah pan-Islamism and the Ummah pan-Arabism. It's not a problem of Morocco now. Now, since 2011, this problem has been solved. When we speak about Amazigh, you have a lot of colleagues and friends from my area. I am from the southeast of Morocco, the eastern Hayatlas, with Rifans, with Sousi. They try to explain that they talk about Amazigh de l'Irkam. You have some people who refuse to now to work with Amazigh as a language standard. They tell that it is not Amazigh, it is Irkam standard. This attitude is very dangerous. Because why? As you tell, when a language isn't worked with grammar, with lexic, and when it is not able to evolve, to stand up with the world, with other languages, it is condemned to be dying. And now, we have to do a choice. I have discussed with my colleagues in the Council of National. We have to with this second language, Amazigh second. You have some Berber peoples who try to fight about first or second. It's not a problem for me. We have two official languages, Arabic and Amazigh. Who is the first? It's Arabic, because it was a year chronologically. And the second official language, since 2011, is Amazigh. But inside Amazigh, that is why I have tried to explain how Amazigh was built by ILCAM. ILCAM has built Amazigh language from Amazigh speaking, original speaking. Tarifit with the Denet, Tashlihit with the Smoda, Tamazigh with the Snhaja. Why I try to speak about this? I would like to explain that Amazigh language is coming from Amazigh speaking. Now, the problem about you speak about the problem of local, the heritage, and the wealth, and all these patrimony who is in Qusima, in Nador, in Jba, in Steha, in Budnib, in Ouarzazate, it's I think the mission of the council and of the government. How to give these heritage, these languages, not dialects, the opportunity to live and to improve their existence in the country. I think the problem we have now in Morocco is the problem of young people who chose, I understand they chose to live, and they live with the globalization. I have students in university who tell me, why you would like me to speak or to learn English? I speak Darija with my family. I speak Darija in the, I would like to learn English and China because I hope to work in Canada or in Shanghai or in Paris. I am not, je n'ai pas envie, I would like to live in Rashidia or in Ouarzazate or in Steha or in Husima. I hope to live in Canada or in Shanghai. That is our problem now. Thank you.
We are going to take one more question because we are really, oh my God, see how many questions we have? Yeah. I don't know how to, can you help me please? Let's take one from the, oh no, we have taken one this side, so let's take one from this side. Yes, please. Yeah. Yes, you. Sorry?
Balado.
No. We won't be able to hear you.
Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to thank you for this amazing presentation. I am Amazigh. I come from House, but I just wanted to reflect on the situation of the language, Amazigh language, because I live with my grandparents in the same house. They speak Amazigh. My parents speak Amazigh. I don't speak Amazigh. And I mean, throughout my childhood, I've always been reflecting on, the reasons why they use this language and I don't speak it. And they only use it when they talk to, for example, my uncles or my aunts. They use the language, but with me, they never used it before. So I grew up thinking that Amazigh language is only used when talking about issues or problems of family. And now, for example, when I meet people outside, in conferences or somewhere, I do acknowledge that I am Amazigh. I have Amazigh origins. But the fact that I don't speak the language makes me feel so embarrassing. So I think that it's not only about, as you mentioned, the laws or regulations or imposing, the language from the stakeholders, but it's also about, it's a parenting issue. Because even now kids, they grow with an attitude towards that language. How come a kid goes to school and learns Amazigh language, but in his house, he's not being exposed to this language? So I think raising awareness comes first. From the parents, from the side of parents, and then perhaps we can move to laws and acknowledging the presence of the language in classrooms or in the educational systems.
And you say it brilliantly in English.
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, this is a real issue. This is the real issue. I really carried a research on a community, my community, the Beni community in the northeastern part of Morocco. That's exactly the issue there. And the language is being lost, actually. So there is a family planning. That parents tell you, what do you want my child to do with Amazigh? What is it used? And they were even criticizing me for asking them, why didn't you transmit the language to your children? And they told me, do you think you have achieved what you have achieved because you are Amazigh and speak Amazigh? It's because you speak French and English that you are where you are. So I think that parents actually tried to, and this is what they said, because there was a lot of stigmatization of Amazigh, and I did undergo this stigmatization myself. I overcame it actually through research. When I tried to do research about understanding why the Amazigh is being lost in my community, that's how I really tried to do some psychotherapy on myself and really claim my identity and relearn, because I stopped using the language at the age of about 10. And I had it, but I couldn't speak it. I had to go back to the community, stay again with people, and relearn the language. It was there, but I lost it. So I think that this is actually the main issue. And in the conclusions of my study in 2000, because that's where I defended my doctorat d'etat, 2004, I was hoping, because I was not aware that one day Morocco will achieve what it has achieved with teaching Amazigh, and of course, teaching Amazigh was launched by officialization. I was then claiming that Amazigh should be established as an official language so as to have people change the attitudes towards it. And I was hoping that the teaching will be done properly, because the teaching of Amazigh was not done properly, and this is why it failed. And of course, I also called for awareness campaigns among Amazigh communities. Now, only people who are aware. I have Yassin here, who is actually transmitting Amazigh to his kids. They speak fluently, but only people who are aware of the issue do transmit the language. So that's the main issue that Professor actually addressed. There is the policies now, they are there, favorable attitudes, whether they are really in favor or not, but they are there. We have the Constitution recognizing it. But what about the families? Because when a language is being lost, it's very difficult to bring it back.
And what about economy and society? What's the mission of Amazigh in the society? It's not only a problem of family or community. Why you would like you need to learn Amazigh? Why? Out of speaking while my parents or my uncles. Why? Is it important in my job? Am I able to have a job with an Amazigh speaking? That is the most important question now. Because if you have students with a bachelor or doctorate in Amazigh and after they have no job, why do you want young people learning Amazigh? That is the question now. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm really sorry.
Welcome everybody to this session. We will have 3 speakers, one in presence and 2 online. We begin with our first presentation, which will be addressed by Dr. Fanny Krishna and Anaga Paniker, entitled Policy, Polity and Identity of Language Diversity in India. So I would like also to thank our audience online who are with us online, and of course they will have the floor if they have any questions for our presentations. So we begin with our first presentation. Thank you.
Hello and greetings from University of Delhi. Firstly, I would like to congratulate FEL 2023 on the successful conduction of this conference. Today our topic is Policy, Polity and the Identity of Language Diversity in India, and this is a collaborative presentation between myself, Anana, and Dr. P. Fanny Krishna. So, the national education policy are these policies that are proposed to reform the educational system in India. And here in this work, we have tried to critically examine the strategies of the national education policies and its impact on the linguistic diversity in India. So, it also attempts to shed light on the issues relating to language in education policy and the intention of the national education policy with special reference to the NEP. The study analyzes and compares the education and language policies in India and evaluates any potential modifications or estimating their effects on the endangered languages. Educational policy is a linchpin in the nation's education system, and these policies they aim to develop cognitive abilities like literacy, numeracy, critical thinking, problem solving, and these cognitive abilities they need to be promoted within an integrated learning environment. The education policies should also aim to promote ideals like social justice, equality, and tolerance. The national education policies have attempted to promote linguistic diversity and linguistic variety by focusing on multilingualism and the idea of mother tongue education. But there have been some gaps in the implementation processes, which are really from a result from a lack of innovative ideas. And we should discuss about these gaps of implementation further in the presentation. So coming to the background of the study, language in education or language in school planning is very frequently overlooked, and it is an essential part of language policy. So Nancy Hornberger has provided an integrated language policy framework that she proposed in 1994, and it constitutes a very coherent language planning framework. And there are many dimensions to language planning, and some of the key elements of the framework include status planning, corpus planning, and acquisition planning. So status planning, it looks at the issues regarding the formal or informal status of a language. So it deals with power dynamics or prestige, language prestige, and social acceptance of a language. Corpus planning, it basically looks at language structure and standardization, and on how a grammar or a vocabulary or a script of a language can be developed. The acquisition planning, it focuses on the actual learning of the language, and there are creating language learning resources and methods. Now coming to the methodology that we have used in this paper, so a comparative analysis of the education and language policies that have been proposed has been conducted, and by incorporating Hornberger's integrated framework model, we have attempted to evaluate these policies, that is the national education policies that were proposed in 1968, 1986 and 2020. Coming to these national education policies, the first national education policy, which was called the National Policy for Education when it was formulated in 1968, and it aimed at the reformation of the education system, and the main ideals that it focused on were national integration and learning of regional languages. It was in this education policy that the three-language policy was proposed, but the implementation process of the three-language policy had a lot of hurdles because of the opposition from the non-Hindi speaking states, who then later just continued to use the two-language policy. So in the three-language policy that was proposed in 1968, it aimed at having three languages that need to be studied from school. And for the non-Hindi speaking states, Hindi was the third language, whereas for the Hindi speaking states, it was proposed that a southern Indian language would be taught to the students. The NEP 1986, that was the second NEP that was implemented in India, it reiterated most of the aspects that are there in the National Education Policy of 1968. It promoted the idea of the use of modern Indian languages as the medium of instruction, but it extended this idea into not just for medium of instruction for school students, but also in the universities as well. So that is what the National Education Policy 1986 talks about. The National Education Policy of 2020 that was implemented in the year 2020, it reintroduced this three-language policy and has also given a lot of emphasis on mother tongue education. So the NEP 2020, like I mentioned before, it just reintroduced the three-language policy of 1968, and though it has been opposed before by the non-Hindi speaking states, despite that has been reintroduced in 2020. So the question really is that why did they have to revive this three-language policy when it was being opposed by so many of the states, especially the state of Tamil Nadu? And also the question arises, how will this policy be implemented without actually imposing language upon the students of certain states? The second issue that we see in the national education policies, especially 2020, but also the previous education policies, is that there exists a gap between the policy framework and the implementation strategies. So for the implementation, for example, for mother tongue education that is emphasized in NEP 2020, a lot of the curricula needs to be revamped, and also a lot of reading materials, resource materials and study materials needs to be published in order to effectively implement mother tongue education. Also, a lot of research, a lot of resource materials and study materials needs to be translated into the local or the regional Indian languages in order to effectively implement mother tongue education, and also to use, if we need to use these regional languages as a medium of instruction. So, as the NEP 2020, it promotes bilingualism and concept of multilingualism, which can really be effectively brought about in school situations when there's a bilingual school setup, bilingual classroom setup. And so for this, there is a need for teachers to be trained and also proper recruitments of such trained teachers to take place. So teacher training programs need to be set up. The third issue is the gap in addressing the concerns of the preservation of endangered languages. There are many endangered languages in India, and it is a growing concern for linguists to be able to preserve these languages, and not just preserve them, but actually have primers and written materials for the speakers of those languages so that they can revitalize, they can use these resources to revitalize their language. And so the national education policy has not really mentioned, there's a lack of steps that incorporate them into the education system. If the national education policy is emphasizing on terms like mother tongue education, then even the languages that are not spoken by a large group of people, the non-dominant languages of the region, must be addressed as well.
Thank you, Anurag, for giving an elaborated discussion on the work. To give a brief idea, as most of you are aware, the diversity that exists in India, there are multiple languages and there are some tribal languages which are still not documented. Various branches of language. In India, language policy and this education policy, as you're aware, they both go in some sort of hand in hand. And it has played a very crucial role in managing this linguistic as well as the cultural diversity that inherits in this country. Now, India is, like I said, incredibly diverse, and managing this linguistic diversity actually poses challenges and opportunities. Now, how well a policy is made becomes a question, at least to one or two people in this country, because they might be speaking another language. Now, policy has evolved over a time to address many complexities. Like, in a historical context, especially in the case of India, for almost 200, 300 years of colonization, the colonization legacy, the historical influence that the British had on India, it played a very significant role. That's why we had Macmillan model of education until recent times. And English has gained the idea of prestige and power during this colonial period. And it continued even the post-independence after 1947 in India. Now, this language movement came into light somewhere around 1960s. That's where our first policy comes to emergence somewhere around 1968. So this language movement, now post-independence, there were languages-related movement. Now anti-Indian position movement was happening, and there is another movement parallel to it, like let's have Hindi as a lingua franca rather than English, because it is a language of British, or because anyway we colonized for a long time. Now reflections of these, they were in a great need of balancing. Linguistic diversity, college, or avoiding favoritism was one of favoritism to a single language was happening parallelly. Now, in this whole discussion, this national education policy came out somewhere around Anna spoke just now with regard to 1968. Now, this 1968 policy came in this framework of three language formula, emphasizing that study of, let's say, regional languages alongside teaching Hindi uniformly across the country. Now Sanskrit also came in light. Now Sanskrit has also been given that encouraging spirit in this time frame. But then, two and a half decades later, we had 1986 policy. Now National Education Policy in 1986, it also aimed to the next step. When she was talking about the Burke's model, which talks about the education should be more inclusive, the curriculum should be more inclusive. They will have to look upon not just about what is just not just about education or how student is learning, but outcome. What is the outcome, or how inclusive it is? So, based on few of these ideas, somewhere it came up with reducing the social disparities. As you know, India had barriers with regard to caste, and there were particular castes which were not taking minimum basic education. And this policy has this introduction, or call it introduced measures such as scholarships. Like let's say somebody from a community where they have never been to school or they were never education. Those first generation students were getting scholarship. Adult education was also taken a proper shape. Now hiring of teachers from other marginalized community also came into light. And after 1986, so for a long period of time, these ideas were going in parallel. But after the emergence of the technology, called it computers, India came, during Rajiv Gandhi's time, somewhere around 80s or somewhere near to early 90s, computers came to India. So the whole system started changing. Now, this policy, the present policy, the 2020 policy, it has its own lapses, yet I think 2020 policy is this amalgamation of many things that took from 68's policy and 86 policy to make it much stronger and make it India-centric sort of education. Now, national education policy reflected on these contemporary concerns that India should have. Let's say, as you're aware, countries like Germany or China or some, these are examples that I immediately can think of. They're producing their research work or theses in their mother tongue or writing in their own script. But in India, it's only in English. Now, 90% of the research. So, this mother tongue-based education was a strong idea behind this policy and encouraging multilingualism on contemporary, not just mother tongue education, but yes, you have multilingual policy in there. And there's an idea called inclusive curriculum, and it emphasizes use of more technology and community involvement and so on. Now, these policies, especially policies in recent, that is this NEP 2020, encourages the importance of early education, like I said, mother tongue education, development of cognitive abilities, or in terms of inclusiveness, they are also talking about how specially impaired population should have their teaching. There are few challenges and concerns because after the independence, most of it was English dominance that in academia, the Indian academia took that English dominance in higher education, especially in the urban areas. Now, English has remained the dominant medium of instruction all over the country. Now, this creates a sort of clear disparity for a reason that there are tribal languages, there are widely spoken languages which are not really given regional language medium education. So all these things are also in a sort of debate. So it actually becomes, the preservation of these endangered languages becomes one of the key features, at least in the Indian context. And over a period of time, let's say if these languages are lost, then the socio-cultural context is also lost. The diversity of these socio-cultural practices, community involvement, this is lost. And even it is a threat to the idea of globalization also. Globalization and technology developments have added complexity to languages and language policies. English proficiency is often seen as a key factor. But to save a particular language or to understand the socio-cultural point of view, I think language is the key element. Now, language encodes all this data, but in the NEP 2020, this idea has been strongly reflected. Now, that is to say, holistic and flexible education. That is like NEP 2020 actually advocates the flexibility in the education system, breaking down the barriers between this arts and science, and it has this new era's requirement, that is interdisciplinary studies or multidisciplinary studies. Now, while they aim to have, the 1968 policy or 1986 policy, they were aimed to be more flexible, but maybe because of the resources during the time or call it due to non-technology integration, maybe it had some clear lapses in understanding. But the problem lies here is that, irrespective of this technology integration also, this language barriers or understanding language barriers, I think like what Anand was talking about with regard to creating primers, how do we create that? So this is a long-term process. It's a futuristic vision that this NEP 2020 has, but there are immediate things that are quite necessary. Let's say we're talking about inclusive curriculum design. So in this inclusive curriculum designing, what is that idea that NEP 2020 would reflect? While this has some very clear implications that with regard to NEP 20, the point that I would like to make is that inclusion of this Sanskrit or classical language. Now, NEP 2020 highlights the interaction or call it presenting Sanskrit and its rich literature of, and also the other classical languages like Pali and Tamil. Tamil is one of the oldest languages which clearly recorded. Now, while the other policies during 68 and 86, they were more of a regional language spoken in Hindi, and they were not really clear on what happens to Sanskrit, Pali, or in the case of any tribal languages or those lesser known or less spoken languages. Now, community involvement becomes a key factor, and this I think NEP 2020 emphasizes with regard to lifelong learning also. That now emphasizing community involvement in education aims to provide a clear life learning opportunities to all the citizens, as well as these initiatives were there. The social economic development initiatives were also existing during this 86 and 68 policies. But the difference is that in terms of flexibility or in terms of inclusiveness, I think the present policy acts pretty well. But there lies a huge issue in terms of implementation in this diverse country. Now, it's one of the great things about act versus policy. See, policy you can still make some actions, and you have opinions to give on. And I think this is the best time maybe this particular policy still have to evolve in terms of providing how we can implement this in mother tongue based education, or call it how do we implement it in such a big nation with great diversities. I think this can be answered only after maybe a decade or so. Like I said, probably the aim of the present policy I think 2020 is not immediate, but maybe down the line after a decade or two, the fruits of it will be seen. But the core attitude that has to be developed among the researchers of this country who are working on education, language, linguistics, and so on, is creating that literature or helping the government to make frameworks will also become a very crucial thing. Because see, it is not about just policy or implementing for socio-political needs, but any policy should be beneficial to the citizens of the country. Disparities they exist, and some tasks might seem impossible, but the time can actually provide better answers. Now, to give some brief conclusion, I would say that there are some concrete steps that have to be taken, and this has to be surrounded majorly on the lesser known languages or languages that we call it as minority languages and so on. Now, this debate can only give fruits if these people, like linguists, like people from education, sociology, they come together to give a better framework. Now, the need for critically evaluating the policy framework, rights of minority language communities and so on have to be, like I said, taken into consideration. So, I think this policy will have a clear implication on. It is good to see that there are some languages that are already taking a shape of implementation by going through basic education, like in class 1, 2, 3, these primers are now released in some of the tribal languages, but not in many. So it is a long-term plan to see some great work in the future where policymakers and academicians. So this is a brief idea that we gave. Thank you so much. Once again, we thank FEL for organizing this wonderful conference. Thank you so much. And these are some references of, there are some future recommendations also we made. Because of this decade of indigenous languages, I think there should be more concentration of these languages and so on. You can see that. And these are a few works that we refer to. Thank you all. If there is anything, you can kindly mail it to us. Any question or any collaboration also, we will be very happy to work on. Thank you everyone. Have a nice day.
Well, just the thing about India, that's all, since we don't have much. Thank you.
Thank you. So we will move to our second speaker, Professor Hakim El-Mazarov from Institute of Ismaili Studies in London. You have the floor, you have 30 minutes. Wait, 20 minutes. Almost for discussion. Okay. That's not good. Faculté. This is Faculté. Oh, because you put them in the right order.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So can you help to?
Assalamu alaikum. It's a really great honor to be here, and I want first of all to thank Professor Yamina and her team for doing a lot of work behind the scene to make this happen, and we with the fellow, I think very grateful. I'm also pleased to see our founding chair here, Dr. Nicholas Osler, and Chris and Salam to be here. Well, I come from Central Asia. I'm sure you are familiar with the region. It was one of the dynamic regions of Islamic history, especially in 10th, 11th century. And many Islamic intellectuals actually come from the area. Yesterday we were taking tram, and I was very pleased to see a bus, a tram stop called Ibn Sina. I believe this is the same Avicenna, who is well known in the West and in the Arabic world, who come from Central Asia as well. And he created most of his works in Arabic, because Arabic, just like today, English was the language which you could spread the knowledge and engage in intellectual discourse. But he also wrote a book in his mother tongue. It's called Danishnama, which means the book of knowledge. And he really tried to present the values, the ethics, the cultural environment of Central Asia in order to demonstrate that knowledge, that culture is also valuable. And I think not many people realize that, but in Tajik, Persian, Arabic literature, especially in Persian literature, scholars were conscious about their mother tongue. We had a scholar called Sadi Shirazi from Iran, and he has a poem where he says, هر کس که با زبان خود سخندان گردد دانستن صد زبان آسان گردد. Whoever masters his mother tongue, the learning of the 1,000 languages will be easy for him. So that's, I think, just what preamble of my speech, but I'm going to talk about the endangered languages which are spoken in the mountain region of Central Asia, in the Pamir region, and Pamir is takes a large part of the heart of the mountain areas where some of the highest mountains come together. It's been known as a roof of the world by local people. It's a vast desert area, but it's a very high altitude. It's also home to diverse ethnic groups who are known by different languages, but mostly Pamiri. The Russian scholars who initiated the study of these languages called them Pamiri languages, and that language, that term became also part of the identity of the inhabitants of this mountain area. So we have in that mountain area, most of the endangered languages in the Central Asia are preserved namely in that mountain area. They also sort of maintain the what we call the marks of the ancient traditions and cultures, which at some point dominated the cultural landscape of Central Asia. You've probably heard of Scythians, Bactrians, and Sogdians, who occupied actually Scythians, for example, from the whole Eastern Europe till north of India. they spread and they carried with them some of their traditions and cultures which today preserved in the mountain areas. So when scholars explore the Pamiri languages, they find that their commonality to these ancient traditions and cultures. The other important part is the Silk Road. I mean, I'm sure you heard of it, which went through one of the routes of the Silk Road, also passed through Central Asia, through the Pamir area. So we see the amalgamation of various traditions and cultures in the areas, and at the same time that is mostly expressed in their languages. But not just in the languages, in their cultural traditions and practices itself. So this, the communities in general, they identify themselves as Pamirians, but also the whole region is also known as Badakshani, so they also identify themselves as Badakshani's. And in religious terms, they adhere the Ismaili tradition, which is part of the Shia Islam. So in some sense also their religious identity is also becoming prominent, especially in recent years. Now, there are around 10 Pamiri languages, and dialect scholars identify them differently, but the largest group is the Shoghni Rushani group. It includes the languages like Batangi, Sarikuli, Oroshorbi, Wahi, Sangalichi, Yazgulami, and Ishkashimi. I put them in order of the level of endangerment. So Shoghni Rushani, for example, it is the largest representation. Their number fluctuates between 100,000 and 80,000. And the Ishkashimi language is the most endangered. There are only around 1,000 speakers of this language. Now, the language situation in the region, particularly the mountain region itself, it is divided today between two countries like northern Pakistan, western China, Tajikistan, and Afghanistan. So in Tajikistan, which was part of the former Soviet Union, we observed the appropriation of language policies which existed during Soviet time. Okay? The main definition of the nation in Soviet time was a nation is unified by a common language, territory, economic life, psychological makeup. So one nation meant one language. And I think that situation was earlier described in the case of North Africa. It's very common. But interestingly, in Tajikistan, the constitution, the law, made provision for the preservation of the Pamiri languages, and it states that Pamiri languages as a distinctive and historical languages which should be preserved and promoted. And that's the end of the promotion of the endangered these languages. At the level of the policies, it's mentioned this, but in practice, nothing is being done to promote these languages, so there is a rhetoric and reality. Interestingly, when there are, in the case of, like we mentioned, Amazigh, I think that there are provisions as well, but not, and a lot of activities are going, but some resistance from the sides of the parents. In this case, when there are no provisions, no practical activities by the government, it sort of people look at it as a struggle for justice. And in that sense, their language, promoting the language becomes important for preserving their identity and achieving sort of a social justice in the society. So there were some awareness, that factor created some awareness by the communities which tried to promote their languages, but because of a lack of resources, financial support, that advancement is not noticed. So there are no written script. At academic level, scholars use Latin, even Arabic script in some countries for these Pamiri languages, but from the government side, it's not taught, it's not allowed to promote in the education system. The situation is similar in other countries, but there are certain differences. Like in Afghan side, the government is not concerned about the languages right now, and it has been the case for the last couple of decades. So that was allowed that in some sense there were some activities going on to write textbooks and promote the Pamiri language on the Afghanistan side. But in China, where we have also Pamiri speakers, Sarikuli in Wahi, we observe a process of assimilation of these communities into the wider Chinese society. So in school, it's only Han Chinese is taught, and in a generation, if the situation continues, in generation also, the community will forget their mother tongue. Now, just before I go to some cultural change, I think cultural change is instinctively linked with the cultural diversity. It was in the past, it was in the domain of the historian, political scientists, but now most scholars in various disciplines pay more attention to culture and the change in cultural diversity, which is defined as a change in the norms, ideas, values which are shared by a community inhabiting the geographical space. But interesting, the linguistic dimensions are often overlooked in the definition of cultural change, though it is through the language which the norms and ideas of the community are largely transmitted. But more lately, from the review of the literature, we noticed that scholars have tried to test the ideas on how the cultures may change the framework of the cultural evolution and social ecology over time. And thereby, cultural change entails changes in the behavior and psychological makeup of individuals and the various ecological factors, including socioeconomic and political circumstances. Subsequently, the identity and traditions of the community change and evolve to project the cultural transformation which the community experienced. But the vitality of the language is contingent on the community's engagement with their own traditions and practices. And that's what we said about how the parents are interested. It's the process of engagement which can take different shape, but it is essential for our elaboration, understanding. And the ecological factors which define cultural change can be favorable in preservation of language. In the case of the Pamiri languages, in the context of Tajikistan and former Soviet Union, the economic and social development played a vital role because, first of all, the region which I'm talking about, it has seen unprecedented economic development. The Soviet policy was for equality, for justice, and that was favorable for the minorities who took advantage of the situation. So let's just give some examples of how tradition and culture is integrated into the language. In the traditional Pamiri culture, the Pamiri house is a central element, probably the most ancient architectural edifice in the region. It comes from the word cheat, right? But it's not simply house when people use it. So when we look at the semantic, cognitive aspect of the language, there are different levels, different dimensions to this definition, which includes house, family, household, tradition, clan, even in another word in Slavic languages, which also comes from the Scythians, chada, which means children. Okay, so this whole thing which is related to the family is embedded in the understanding of the term chief, which as I said, architecture edifies, where most of the ceremony traditions of the community take place. Now, here is this traditional house. You can see two structures. One is old and one is a modern house. That's how the Pamir house probably looked like about 100 years ago, and now it has been modernized. But if you pay attention, you can see that the main component of the Pamir house are maintained. The structure of the house it has been bigger, more decoration, carving, but the basic architecture is preserved. Why? Because it entails a lot of meanings in it, and people need to preserve the way it is built. So construction of the house can be identical to the constructions of the temple. The Pamiri house, the Pamiri people, they don't have, it's traditional, they didn't have mosque or prayer house, and all their religious ceremonies took place in the house. Okay? So it has this significance which we can look at some of the components, like it has 5 columns inside the house. And these 5 columns are associated with 5 angels. 5 angels in the Zoroastrian or Aryan tradition. And those are like, one of them, Sorush, the god of obedience, the greatness. Anahita was another angel, and it was believed that she was the embodiment of the beauty. So in the house, they kind of maintain the foundation of the house. But in Islamic period, they have taken different Islamic meanings. For example, the five columns are now interpreted as 5 figures in Islam, like Prophet Muhammad, within the Shia Islam, I mean his daughter Fatima, Ali, Hassan and Hussein. So those are now taking this kind of a meaning. And some of the words which are preserved today in the Pamiri language are deeply associated with the usage in the Pamiri house. The main, for example, in the picture you see the main Satan, the column which resembles it's the most important column where most of the traditional practices are held. So the other 2, which are the entrance, you don't see the entrance, but they are definitely resemble Imam Ali and Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein. And next to it is a special place which is preserved for religious leaders, like we call them Khalifa. But the central element in the Pamiri house is known as the central one is a fireplace, known as Kisor. It is the place where the fire is maintained, and it should have maintained throughout the year, because fire is also a sacred element in the Aryan understanding. It's also the place or craft of the women. So it is the place where in the traditional house and all the where traditionally women would sit during the all the traditional religious holidays and ceremonies. It's also the women, I think in one particular feature about Central Asian Islam is that the traditional forms of practices are mostly associated with women, while the formal, you can see it is more with the practices which are dominated by men. So a lot of practices in the house are held by the women. One of them is called like a strach, which is burning an incense. It has a lot of meaning with that, and the range of vocabulary as well associated with that, such as cleansing the physical body and the spirit. It is to, when they make the strach, when they burn that incense, it's applied to honor the ancestors, to cleanse the body from negative energy, and offering offerings to angels and spirits who are maintaining the house. So the fire is very important. If somebody passes away, the fire has to be turned off. So and then after 3 days, it is again revived. Okay, let me end here. Cultural practices, if we go deeper to understanding what they mean, it is a sort of a lifeblood for the survival of languages. The richness and multiplicity of meanings which people attach to those practices strengthen the validity of the language and the identity of the people. Search for meaning, harmony, and nature, and recreation and revival of cultural practices is also an important part of revival of language. In the picture which you see, the Pamiri house was rebuilt by the Pamiri migrants in Moscow. They just built a house resembling their traditional house in the Pamirs, and most of the ceremonies, like wedding ceremonies, they celebrate there. And that's an important element for these migrant communities to keep connection with their language and with their motherland. So, thank you.
So, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to be here, first and foremost. I would like to ask about a clarification in terms of the Palmary languages. So that means that there are not accents or variants of the same language, but rather there are different languages, right? So, like the point is, how can we achieve a unified nation when there are lots of languages, and how can we socialize with others and create a community? That concerns the first question. My second question is that how can we avoid the languages of the elites, if I may call it that way? Exactly, how can individuals of a community avoid the inclination towards a language that is more used and that would create more opportunities for individuals? And I hope that my questions were clear, and thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you. Well, the first question, the Pamiri languages, they are diverse. Even in the Pamir mountain areas, you have one language is spoken in this village, and you go about 20 kilometers to the next village and you don't understand what they are saying. So there is this kind of a variance between some of these languages. Okay, some are, if you listen, then you can slowly understand it, but the difference still big. So the question of, I think the question of what you say is that how can we build one nation if we need to be concerned of so many languages, and is it possible or not, if I correct that? That's what you are saying. I think this is the challenge which endangered languages everywhere face, where in most countries people are concerned about national interest, sort of. Even in the Pamir area, one reason that the government is reluctant to promote these languages because they are afraid of separatism. There are always this idea that, well, if these people know more their languages, they are likely to then demand some kind of autonomy even from the country, because the Pamiri language is spoken in the Badakhshan autonomous region. It's on the paper, right? But still, it's a big concern. Well, I think the fact that there is always fear that this can happen, especially at the top level, and that's one reason when the languages are not promoted, actually in practice. But this is like the fear of teacher in school, in classroom. They are afraid to allow students to ask more questions, and they try to dominate and create that culture of facilitation, which is the challenge for them. Fair, that's the I think the cause of it. But if you allow, if you engage in an equal discussion, you allow others opportunity. Like in your case here, they are giving this opportunity to learn the language, but their parents also have some kind of a resistance. So the states need to be equal and give those rights to every people. And the whole concept of this conference about the diversity, cultural diversity, is important, because the nations which do not promote these multiple languages, they're actually diminishing the cultural diversity in the area, and they are losing from that. Your second question was
how to avoid a powerful language, the language of the
Dominant language.
how to avoid. I think it's related to first question, right? It's the dominant language, the majority, the power holders, they hold it. It's in every country. How to avoid it is a good question, because it has its own minuses and advantages and disadvantages as well, right? The elite, what you call it, in a sense, are leading the society, right? They're an important part of the society. It's just people look into them as a model, and they should use their power to show the justice in relation to others. But if they don't, they turn it to authoritarian or dictatorship. I think they will lose that privilege of being called as elite.
One last remark. Sorry, just one last remark. I wonder, it always gives me this urge to bring back the rest of the world to North Africa, since this is where, and Central Asia to North Africa, you can see the similarities in this in many ways. I just want to urge people to read one of the celebrated French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu. One of his earliest works was called La Maison Kabyle et le Monde Renversé. That is the Kabyle house and the upside down world. And it describes exactly how the society treats the construction of the house, which parts of the house belong to what represents the woman, for instance, what is the domain of the man, all in the shape of the house, which pillar represents what. And there is this Kabyle adage which says that the woman is the central pillar of the house, for instance. And it's not necessarily about language, but all these things, the cultural diversity comes back here. And I just want to finish with something else I'm talking about, again bringing it. Hakim talked about Avicenna, Ibn Sina. And when you read 90% of European literature about the Muslim world, you always hear Arab scholars of the medieval Arab scholars, medieval Arab scientists, medieval Arab jurists. And then you look at their biography. And Ibn Arumi was Greek. Al-Khawarizmi, who everybody knows here, was Persian. Ibn Said Georgiani was Iranian. Again, the same thing again. 9 of the most celebrated astronomers of the Muslim world, the medieval Muslim world, which are called Arab astronomers, were all Persian. Averroes, Ibn Rushd, was a Berber. Ibn Battuta, Ibn Khaldun. But then it's always the Arab scholar this and the Arab historian, the Arab thing. The history is changed, not by us, but by outsiders, very often. And this is the thing. Muslim is one thing, and then he's just given us the proof, you can do that. But you have to, they're from Central Asia, they're from North Africa, they're things, and they're all things. And then we come to a guy whom everybody calls Leo Africanus. They were tired of calling him Abu Hassan Muhammad al-Wazam al-Fasi. They call him Leo Africanus because he moved he was from North Africa, he moved to Spain, and then when he went to Sicily, working for King Roger, then he became one of them, so he's changed his name again. So it's in the eye of the beholder, as the thing says. But let's come back to the real history, study your own identity, study your own history, and espouse it, take it in, own it up. You know, that's what really counts, even if you say it in English.